Men cannot give birth. There, I've said it. It's out in the open. I just want to get that out of the way because that is the premise of this video. So recently, there's been a number of reports well, I should say there's been one particular report about a man giving birth, but there's been um, there's been a trend in recent years of reports like this. But let me just focus on this particular one. Um, and all the, for want of a better term, mainstream media has reported it as transgender man, pronoun man, gives birth to a healthy baby 5 years after. This is from the Independent. Transgender man gives birth to a healthy baby 5 years after having first child as a woman. I'm going to read out this report. It's not particularly long, so bear with me. I'll read this out from the Independent. A transgender man has given birth to a healthy baby 5 years after having his first child while living as a woman. 30-year-old Cassie, I presume that's pronounced, it's Kaci, Cassie Sullivan from Wisconsin, US, is believed to be the first person in the world to give birth living as both a woman and a man. Sullivan already has one child, 5-year-old Grayson, with his ex-husband. Grayson was born while Sullivan was living as a woman before transitioning. In giving birth to his new baby, Phoenix, a healthy child weighing 8 pounds 9 ounces, Sullivan underwent a caesarean section after 7 days in labour. Phoenix was conceived with Sullivan's partner, Stephen, 27, after Sullivan took a break from male hormones. The birth comes 4 years after Sullivan, a business student, started his transition from female to male. The couple have decided not to reveal Phoenix's sex, choosing to raise him as gender neutral until they are old enough to decide their sexuality for themselves. Sullivan says he did receive lots of attention when pregnant, including some abuse online, but he wanted to break the stigma around trans parenthood. The moment the baby came out and I got to hear him cry was indescribable, Sullivan said. It's incredible to think that I had made this little human. After 26 weeks of morning sickness and 7 days in labour, it was such a beautiful moment. We are just so happy and grateful and enjoying spending time together as a family. The baby is delightful, loving, and sweet. The connection I felt to them throughout my pregnancy has been an incredible privilege, and the last 9 months have brought my partner and I so close together. Sullivan added that he refused to engage with people who were perturbed by the idea of him giving birth. They will try and find a safe space and violate it with their opinions, but they are jerks, he said. I don't waste my time or energy by giving them anything in return. Because I don't see pregnancy as inherently feminine, and because I don't subscribe to make believe gender roles, I wasn't threatened by the idea of pregnancy. It didn't make me feel any less masculine. Sullivan says he struggled with his identity his whole life and suffered abuse from the age of 4. When he became pregnant with his first child, he had hoped the experience would help make him feel more feminine, but it didn't. Um, there's one thing that's very obvious in the reporting of this case and others that are similar to it. The media utterly pandered to the notion of pronouns. He. To me, this is not demonstrative of tolerance. This is demonstrative of actually a sort of totalitarianism. And let me explain what I mean by that. Um, Pronouns, when it comes to trans people, is obviously a very central issue. And I saw a debate between Melanie Phillips of the Daily Mail and Dawn Butler, the Labour MP. Dawn Butler said it's just about equality. She's the shadow women and equality minister. But arguing that it's just about equality in terms of the pronouns is deceptive because actually what we are seeing here is a situation where academics are in fact being threatened with job loss, with character assassination, for no other reason than trying to do research on the very real phenomenon of body dysphoria. Not to be confused with body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia is you feel a huge lack of confidence from some sort of body appearance. You feel you're overweight. You feel you've got ugly nose, etc. Body dysphoria is you feel you were born in the wrong body. Now, I don't know what the prevalence is among trans people of body dysphoria, but I would imagine it's pretty high. Um, and what I find problematic is the fact the media just pander to these pronouns as if they're gospel. I came across a video a while back, and in the video, it was I think it was a pediatrician. I can't remember exactly, but she mentioned that if someone were to amputate a perfectly healthy limb, say an arm or a leg, they would be diagnosed with a mental illness. Take, for example, Vincent van Gogh. He cut off his ear. He suffered mental illness, and everyone recognizes that. Now, if a man, a biological man, decides that he is a woman and decides to have an operation that cuts off his perfectly healthy penis, that's not considered mental illness. That's considered him finding his gender identity. And I think, from my opinion, from my perspective, what we're seeing with trans activism is basically mental illness, which is body dysphoria, being treated as something that needs to be denied, basically. In other words, sensitivity around the pronouns seems to matter more than the science of this. Now, the science is a biological male cannot give birth. He simply cannot give birth. Biological women can. So, a trans man, that is, a woman who has transitioned to be a man, i.e., identified as a man, can give birth because she still has the biological sexuality. Um, I'll use a neutral term, they will deny it. They will say, I'm not a woman, I'm a man. Therefore, you get these headlines, man gives birth. It's sloppy journalism because it is simply not scientific fact. Men cannot give birth. I may be mistaken in this, but the only species in which the male can give birth is seahorses. A biological man born with a penis cannot give birth. Science is not bigotry. And I think what we're seeing with trans activism is a sort of totalitarianism. Now, that report says I will not talk to people who don't recognize this. I understand trans people would be sensitive about people questioning these sort of things. I get that. But where I have a big problem is where there is threats of legislation. And this is where Professor Jordan Peterson has come under a lot of fire. He's been vilified as a hateful transphobe. There's been others. They've been threatened with job loss. They've had character assassination. And for what? For refusing to pander to this conformity of pronouns. And the press is, I think, putting sensitivity over science. So when a trans man gives birth, what is actually happening is a biological woman has given birth. A biological woman who calls herself a man has given birth. That's what we're seeing. And it doesn't matter what stage of the transition they're in, because one thing that trans activism doesn't account for is you cannot ever 100% change biology. You can mutilate your penis or your vagina, but I don't think that you can change biology 100%. People will say, but the definition of woman and man is not solely defined by biology. Okay, even if we concede that, the problem of trans activism, as it stands, is that biology is utterly ignored. That's why you get the likes of the independent pandering to it, transgender man. Why not just say transgender person or trans man? Don't say transgender man. It's basic dishonesty. It's just basic dishonesty. And the problem, what we see here is whenever anyone questions this, they're labeled a bigot, they're labeled a hateful person, a transphobe. So let me just be clear about my own position. I don't hate trans people. They haven't done anything to me. Why would I hate them? But I do get irritated by the dishonesty. People will say live and let live. Well, there's a problem in that. There is actually a utilitarian issue here. Children who are born to a trans man who is born biologically female are inevitably going to grow up confused. And I think we haven't spoken out enough, there hasn't been enough research about the effects this has on children. I mean, it's one thing talking about gay adoption, but when you're actually having a situation where someone born biologically a woman identifies as a man, has a partner who is a biological man, I mean, that child, what are they to believe that their parents, one is a man, one is a woman, both men, and then they will say, but we're not gay, or maybe they are. But I just think there's a lot of questions around this that are not being addressed because there's a stone wall of accusation of bigotry. And the trans community are actually pretty intolerant. You know, they're not interested in debate. I think they're very interested in pushing for legislation to try and criminalize how people talk. And I think that is a very real problem. I think it's totalitarianism. And I think we need to rein in on this a little bit. Now, I am well aware that hate crimes do occur. There have been examples, and you see a Wikipedia list of this, trans people who have been brutally attacked, murdered. That's horrible. No one should be murdered for who they are. There's been some truly horrible cases. In Brazil, there was a trans woman who was raped and brutally beaten to death. So, transphobic hate crime is wrong. There should be legislation against it. But I have a big problem with having legislation against pronouns and threatening academics. You particularly see this in universities, threatening academics with job loss, with character assassination, simply for doing research on, for example, body dysphoria. And I find it troubling that the press, much of the media, is simply pandering to this. They're using the sort of pronouns that trans people are demanding. They're not using pronouns that relate to the biological fact. Now, I don't care if you've had an operation. If you were born with a penis, you will never be a biological woman. You can call yourself a woman, live and let live, but don't say that that is the same as being a biological woman. It's not. Likewise, do not say that you're a man if you were born with a vagina. You can call yourself a man. We live in a free country, that's your right. But do not say, I demand to be considered a man the way that someone born with a penis is. The problem we see here is that in trans activism, biology is totally made irrelevant. And I think that is a nonsense. Now, I get it. Trans people will watch this and say I'm a hateful bigot. And there's nothing I can do about that. I can say I've got nothing against them personally, I wish them well, and or they condemn hate crimes. But that's not enough. As far as they're concerned, I have to see them as a woman or a man because they demand it. At some point, we have to just get back to common sense. And I really believe that, I mean, the way the media panders to dishonesty is pathetic. Transgender man gives birth to healthy baby 5 years after having first child as a woman. What that should really read is transgender person who identifies as a man gives birth to healthy baby 5 years after having first child identifying as a woman. Or being a woman, rather. The scientific fact is men cannot give birth. So why is the media pandering to this lie? Why? Because they don't want to offend the trans community. It's that simple. So, in other words, sensitivity matters more than fact. And it's kind of an upside down world. Now, what concerns me is you'll have other other systems of society that will look at this and say this shows the decadence of the West. You have Putin's Russia, Xi's China. They will look at the West and say the West is going crazy with this sort of stuff. Now, I happen to believe that the West is the most tolerant, liberal, and open society on earth, collectively. And that's a good thing. But there comes a point when we have to just see common sense. And saying that someone born as a woman, and I disregard this thing about being assigned, because it gives the impression that midwives have some sort of malicious agenda. They were assigned male at birth, they were assigned female at birth. No, they had a penis, they were male, they had a vagina, they were female. That isn't some sort of malicious agenda, it's just the midwives, the doctor doing their job. So, a few final words. I feel desperately sorry for, sympathetic to trans people who are, especially young trans or young people who are suffering from body dysphoria. I really do sympathise with them. It must be a very difficult thing, constantly feeling that lack of confidence. And I think that there needs to be more of a focus on mental health treatment. What we're seeing now is a situation, this might be for another video, but we're seeing a situation where children as young as 5. I mean, when I hear the term transgender child, I cringe because to me, that is adults deciding that a 5-year-old should get surgery. Not only is that physically dangerous, the fact of the matter is children go through phases. And I know trans people dislike this sort of description, but it's a fact. I have a gay friend, and when he was younger, he always used to say, "Oh, I should have been born a girl." And I know there was times he contemplated having the transition. He never did. And he is now happy as a gay man. But he is a biological man. And he's happy with that, from what he's told me. And I assume he is. I'm going to round this up, but the concern that I have is the totalitarianism that's coming through here. Because Don Butler says it's all about equality. Well, that's all very well. But when you're threatening legislation against people, then it becomes another matter. It becomes totalitarianism. When there is another person involved, i.e., a child, then it becomes more of a question of live and let live. It becomes, well, what about the effect on that child? Because that's not a case of live and let live. That's a question of, well, what about the life of that child? I think they're very real questions here, and I find it unfortunate that the media feels that they need to pander to the pronouns more than biological fact. Like I say, if you cut off your arm, you're diagnosed with mental illness. You cut off a perfectly healthy penis. Well done, you're finding your expression. That cannot be right.